Conrad Weiser traveled for days on end. He was determined to reach the headquarters of the Six Nations. He launched his journey with no guarantee of a peaceful alliance with the natives. Being one of few who could converse with the Six Nations tribes, the governor of Virginia had no other option than to ask Weiser for his crucial assistance. Holder of the Heavens, Debate and Diplomacy between Conrad Weiser and the Six Nations. Despite Conrad Weiser's admiration for Native American culture, natural affiliation, and loyalty ultimately led him to support the European colonists in his diplomatic efforts. Conrad Weiser was born in 1696 in a small village called Afstadt in Germany. After the death of his mother in 1709, Weiser's father moved Conrad and his 7 siblings to London, where they worked for a year before relocating to New York in 1710. In 1712, Weiser's family moved to the Schoharie Valley, New York, and Weiser's father agreed to let Conrad live for a time with the nearby Mohawk tribe. While living with the Mohawk people, Weiser was immersed in Native American life. He initially stayed with the family of Chief Quinant as a guest. Quinant took a liking to Weiser and took him as his own child. By the end of his stay with the tribe, Weiser was adopted by the Quinant chief's wife. He became familiar with their unique culture during his stay. The Mohawk people nicknamed Weiser Cherokee-O-Wagon, or Holder of the Heavens, as a way of showing how dear to them he became. Not only did he adopt their culture for a vast period of time, but Weiser also became fluent in their language. There was no one else to be found among our people who understood the language, so that I gradually became a complete master. Conrad Weiser. He began a lasting relationship with the Mohawk tribe based off of values of trust and courage. They adopted Weiser, taught him everything they knew, and expected him to reciprocate with his ability to protect their people later in his life. This year of Weiser's early life put him at the forefront of diplomatic relationships between the colonists and the Iroquois. In 1720, Weiser married Anna Eve Feck, with whom he eventually had 14 children. In 1729, he moved his family to Tulpehocken, Pennsylvania, and began a family farm. In 1731, Weiser met Shikellamy, an Iroquois chief. This was the beginning of his diplomatic career, and for 17 years he worked together with Shikellamy to negotiate many land treaties between European settlers and the Iroquois tribes. The first of these took place in Philadelphia in 1731. Weiser's new ally, Shikellamy, engaged his help as an interpreter in the 1731 negotiations, and the two were so successful that Weiser continued in the role of an interpreter and diplomat for many years. After living in the Ephrata settlement for 6 years, Weiser decided to leave and began work as an interpreter for the government in 1736. Chief Justice James Logan was dismissed by the Penn Sons after he used his power irresponsibly and caused arguments with the Native Americans. In order to repair what was left of the relationship with the natives and gain what they could, Weiser was asked to negotiate the purchase of the lower Susquehanna Valley. Thus, the Iroquois began negotiating with other tribes' land, even though they didn't own it. This ultimately led to the Iroquois becoming the sole Native American group that the Pennsylvania settlers negotiated with, and Weiser gained Iroquois approval for the purchase of the Lenape land in the upper Delaware Valley. Just 1 year later, Weiser made his journey from Tulpehocken, Pennsylvania to Onondaga, the headquarters of the Six Nations. He was requested to go to Onondaga by Governor Gooch of Virginia, who wanted to establish peace with the Six Nations. In compliance with his request, Weiser made his journey. Upon reaching their destination, Weiser conversed with the natives, who clearly distrusted the European people. The speaker said that the Six Nation warriors often met Englishmen trading to the Catawbas, and often found that the English betrayed them. Conrad Weiser. After a multitude of convincing, they decided to agree to peaceful relations. We desire you will think you are now joined to us and our brethren, and you are not becoming one people with us. Asenharu. Another notable treaty Weiser helped negotiate was the 1744 Treaty of Lancaster. This treaty turned over thousands of acres of Native American lands to the colonists. During the treaty conference, Weiser served as an interpreter, facilitating communications between the Iroquois and the colonists. He also assisted in the presentation of gifts from the settlers to the native peoples.
If you get a group of Iroquois who need to talk to these officials from Pennsylvania, Iroquois are coming into that conference with a certain expectations of what diplomacy looks like. The officials from Pennsylvania are coming to that conference with very different ideas of what diplomacy looks like. Weiser's job is to make sure that the two know how to do the right things and say the right things so that they don't offend each other, so that they don't break out into war instead of that his job is like, I understand how to deal with, like, I sort of have a foot in both worlds, so I kind of know how to sort of deal with that. So
Weiser journeyed to Ohio in the fall of 1748 on a diplomatic mission to the First Nations people living there. The purpose of this mission was to deliver a gift to the First Nations people from authorities in Pennsylvania and Virginia colonies, seeking to secure an alliance with the Ohio First Nations. He remained in Ohio for about a month and assisted in interpreting many meetings with the native leaders in order to form a positive relationship in the hopes of a successful alliance. As a key figure in the French and Indian War, Weiser was appointed lieutenant colonel. Partnered with Benjamin Franklin, Weiser helped with the establishment of numerous forts between the Delaware and Susquehanna rivers. Weiser's early life with the Six Nations influenced him greatly. Their decision to all but adopt Weiser was one made with the assumption that he would take care of them in the future. Despite his lifelong alliance and association with the Native Americans, Weiser decided to take the side of the British in the French and Indian War. Weiser's family-like association with the Native Americans proved to be incomparable with his natural affiliation with the European colonists.
In their minds, when you met together at a treaty conference, you were never just talking business. You were never transacting a business deal. You were allies who were sitting down and working together in good faith. At least that was their perspective. So I think from a Native perspective, they become disenchanted with so many, when treaty after treaty, which they went into with a thought that, like, we're allies, we're establishing lasting friendship that is going to be based on, like, we're going to trust each other and so forth. When they see that pattern over and over of that expectation for what this treaty could do, and they see that being, like, dismantled almost immediately, like, by the time and this starts even before Weiser's really on the scene. So by the time Weiser's negotiating, Native people are already bringing a certain skepticism to just the act of treaty making in general, because they already have seen the pattern that we do this, it gets broken. We do this, it gets broken.
Weiser's work as a diplomatic interpreter was made possible through the debate over land between the Native Americans and the European colonists. At first, his work was extremely successful, as he was able to negotiate many land treaties, which were seen as valuable accomplishments. However, over time, these treaties fell apart because the colonists saw themselves as much less permanent than the Native Americans did, and were not afraid to use aggressive tactics in order to get more land. When it came down to it, Weiser worked in favor of European success, even if it meant failure for the Native Americans. This led to fraying relationships between the various groups, and ultimately much resentment toward the colonists. Thus, Weiser's efforts, though successful at first, eventually ended in failure. We see similarities in modern times to those events in Weiser's lifetime. There are 326 Native American reservations in the United States today, where natives should have the land and resources they need in order to live out their lives comfortably. Even though they have the land to live on, the resources given to them are extremely limited and most of the time damaged. Similarly, Weiser believes that he took the correct course of action in working with the natives, but ended up causing more harm than good in the long run. Looking back on Weiser's life and the work he did, many believe that Weiser used his position and advantage over the natives to achieve the inevitable. He recognized the advantage Europeans had over natives and essentially served as a catalyst for the expansion. Even though he was working to attain better, more civilized transitions for the natives, his ultimate goal was still the same as the majority of colonists.